The betrayal did not arrive with a thunderclap. It seeped into my home like a colorless, odorless gas, filling the rooms where I had built my life until I was suffocating on it, completely unaware. I saw something today that I should never have seen. I saw my own son, David, the man I had raised with a love that felt as essential as breathing, rifling through my private documents like a common thief. He was in my study, in my home, violating my life. And the worst part, the part that settles in my stomach like a block of ice, is that he does not know I saw him. He does not know the small, discreet security camera I had sent away to be repaired, the one he and his wife had called a paranoid waste of money, is back in its place on the bookshelf, working perfectly. It all began 3 days ago when I quietly called the technician to fix the surveillance system. It had been malfunctioning for weeks, and I felt vulnerable. A 71-year-old woman, a retired librarian living alone in a large Boston brownstone, is a target. My vulnerability had only increased since David and his wife, Chloe, had insisted on moving in with me 6 months prior. They said it was to take better care of me after my husband, Arthur, passed 2 years ago. How bitterly ironic that phrase sounds to me now. I had become so accustomed to them managing, or rather controlling, every aspect of my life, from my appointments to my social calendar, that I completely forgot to mention I had hired someone for the repair. It simply slipped my mind, but thank God it did. If I had told them, I would have discovered the truth far too late, or perhaps never at all. This morning, after David supposedly left for a promising job interview and Chloe went to the specialty grocery store across town, I decided to check if the cameras were truly operational. The technician had installed a new, user-friendly app on my phone that let me see the whole house in real time. My finger hovered over the icon. A part of me wanted to put it off, to continue living in the placid, comfortable ignorance I had enjoyed. But something else, a cold tremor of instinct, urged me to do it immediately. I tapped the screen. The app flickered, and then my study materialized, crystal clear. My heart did not just stop. It felt as if it had been violently seized from my chest. David and Chloe had not gone anywhere. They were right there, not in the living room, but in my private study, the room I always kept locked, the room that held all of Arthur's letters and my entire financial life. My documents, the neatly organized binders I had spent a lifetime curating, were scattered across my antique mahogany desk as if it were their personal war room. David, my David, held my folder of important papers, the one I kept in the bottom locked drawer. Chloe, sharp and efficient, stood by the window, holding my brokerage statements up to the light. They moved with the chilling familiarity of people who had done this many times before. "Where is the original deed?" I heard Chloe's voice, thin and sharp through the camera's tiny microphone. Her tone was not one of panic, but of cold, calculating business. "Slade told us he specifically needs the original document to make the forgery believable. He can't work from a copy." Slade. That name sent a chill down my spine so profound it made my teeth ache. He was some financial consultant David had met, a man with vacant eyes and a smile that never reached them. I had disliked him on sight. Now I understood why. "It has to be here," David replied, his voice thick with a frustration that was ugly and unfamiliar. "Mom is so meticulous with these things. She keeps everything organized to the letter." That word, meticulous, dripped from his lips like a curse. The very order and care he had always praised me for, the stability I had provided him his entire life, was now just an obstacle to his greed. Chloe moved closer to the window, holding another document. "Look at this, David, the appraisal from last year. It says the brownstone is worth more than $1.2 million. Slade was right. It's worth all this effort. The house, the home I had bought with Arthur, piece by piece, with the sweat of 30 years of my work and his. The house where I had rocked David to sleep, where I had nursed him through fevers, where I had proudly watched him leave for college. The house I planned to leave him as his inheritance, a symbol of our family's stability, not a prize for him to steal while I was still breathing its air. Once we have the deed in our name," Chloe continued, her voice low and conspiratorial, "we can sell. We'll move her into something smaller, A one-bedroom studio apartment will be enough for her last years. Her last years. They were discussing my death. They were planning my disposal, as if I were a piece of furniture that no longer fit their decor. They spoke of me as if I were already gone, a simple logistical problem to be managed on their path to wealth. David walked toward my bedroom, and I quickly swiped on the app to the hallway camera. I watched him enter my room, my sanctuary, and begin opening drawers, searching desperately. "She has to have a safe deposit box key or something," he muttered, audible even from the hall. She was always so paranoid about important documents. Paranoid, another word that once meant careful, protective. Now it was a flaw they could exploit. He returned to the study with empty hands, his face flushed with frustration. Chloe was waiting, arms crossed, clearly annoyed by the delay in her grand plan. "Slade gave us until Friday to get the original deed," she told him, her voice like a steel blade. "Without it, he can't do the job. And without the job, we'll keep living on the crumbs your mother gives us." Crumbs? I gave them a $1,500 stipend every month for their personal expenses. Crumbs. I took from my own retirement savings to keep the peace, to support my son while he found himself after his last job fell through, money that was apparently not enough for their ambition. "We'll pressure her more," David said, slumping into my reading chair, Arthur's chair. "We'll tell her they're medical insurance papers, something urgent she needs to sign. She's been so confused lately, she won't even read what she's signing." Confused. It was true that sometimes it took me a moment longer to find a name or a date, a perfectly normal artifact of being 71. But they had been cultivating that narrative, watering it like a poisonous plant. Every time I questioned their decisions, they exchanged that look, the poor mom look, making me doubt my own mental clarity. "What if she gets suspicious?" Chloe asked. David shrugged, a gesture of such profound indifference that it physically broke my heart. What's she going to do? Call the police on her own son? Besides, once we sign the papers with Slade, it'll be too late to reverse the process. It will be legally ours. Chloe smiled for the first time in the entire conversation. It was a cruel, satisfied reptilian smile. "Perfect. Then tomorrow, we'll bring her Slade's forged documents and tell her it's for updating her will. She'll sign without asking questions." They began to gather my documents, but not as they had found them. They stacked them carelessly, shoving them back into folders without the order I always maintained. It was a final, small act of violation, as if they were not even trying to hide that they had been there. Before leaving the room, David stopped. He looked directly at the bookshelf where the camera was hidden. For one heart-stopping moment, I thought he had discovered me. I thought he knew I was watching. But he just stood there, thoughtful. "I wish we didn't have to do this," he murmured, more to himself than to Chloe. "Are you getting cold feet?" she asked, her tone a mix of surprise and pure annoyance. "No, but," David sighed, a deep, rattling sound. "She's my mom, Chloe, the woman who raised me, the woman who worked 2 jobs to give me everything after Dad died." For a microscopic flash of time, hope ignited in my chest. It was a foolish, desperate thing. Maybe there was something left of the boy who used to bring me wildflowers from the park. Maybe there was still salvation for us. But Chloe walked over to him, her movements predatory. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "David, honey, think about our future. Think about the life we deserve. Are we going to depend on an old woman who gets more senile every day? This house is our chance to be independent, to finally build something of our own." And just like that, with those venomous, ambitious words, the last vestige of my good son disappeared. I watched his expression harden, his shoulders straighten. Greed, cold and absolute, took over his features. "You're right," he finally said, his voice firm. "It's time to think about us." They left the study, and I stayed there, sitting at my kitchen table, staring at my phone screen as if it were a horror movie. But it was not fiction. It was my real life, my only life, falling apart before my eyes. For 38 years, I had built that man. I had fed him, clothed him, educated him. I had comforted him in his failures and celebrated his triumphs. I had worked until my bones ached to pay for his graduate degree. I had given up rebuilding my own romantic life to focus entirely on him. And now, my greatest creation had become my greatest betrayal. But there was something David and Chloe did not know, something that would turn them from hunters into prey without them even realizing it. I had all their conversations recorded. I had the unshakable evidence of their criminal conspiracy, and for the first time in months, for the first time since they had moved in and begun their campaign of subtle control, I had the power. The war had just begun, and they did not even know they had already lost. Over the next 3 days, I lived a double life I never imagined possible. On the surface, I was Eleanor Vance, the aging, slightly confused mother. I made breakfast. I asked about their fictitious plans, and I smiled when David kissed my forehead before he left for the day, only to circle back and meet Chloe in the study. But beneath that fragile facade, I was an undercover detective in my own home. I was a strategist, documenting every move, every conversation, every single piece of evidence that defined the greatest betrayal of my life. Technology, the very thing they believed I was too old to understand, had become my secret, powerful ally. The app on my phone gave me access to the cameras 24 hours a day. I could see the living room, the kitchen, the main hallway, and, most importantly, the study they had made their private sanctuary of conspiracy. On Tuesday morning, I watched them planning their next steps. I sat in the kitchen, ostensibly reading a novel, but my phone was propped up behind the toaster, live streaming their meeting. Chloe was on my couch, her laptop open, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen. David paced back and forth, nervous. "Slade says he has the documents ready," Chloe informed him, reading from an email. "But he needs us to bring the original deed to make the final signature comparisons. He says your mother's signature is very consistent, and he needs a perfect match." "What if Mom notices it's missing?" David asked, biting his nails. It was a habit he'd had since he was 5, a habit I had always tried to gently correct. Seeing him do it now filled me not with nostalgia, but with disgust. Chloe looked up, and I could see that cold smile I was coming to know far too well. "David, your mother is 71. She hasn't looked at that document in years. We can just borrow it for a few hours and have it back before she even notices." Borrow it. They spoke of stealing the deed to my home, the very foundation of my life, as if it were a cup of sugar from a neighbor. But what if— David stopped mid-sentence, looking toward the kitchen where I was supposedly lost in my book. "What if what?" Chloe insisted, her voice sharp with impatience. "What if she gets suspicious? I've noticed her being more attentive lately. It's like she's watching us." My heart hammered against my ribs. Had I been so obvious? Had my feigned confusion slipped? Chloe laughed, a sound with no humor in it, only disdain. "David, please, your mother spends most of her day watching her old movies and talking to her cat. If she were so attentive, she would have noticed you've been lying about looking for a job for 6 weeks. 6 weeks. So, the lie was even deeper than I thought. It was all part of their elaborate performance, designed to keep me calm and unsuspecting while they sharpened the knife. "You're right," David admitted, though his voice still wavered. "It's just, I don't know. I feel like she's judging me all the time." "That's your guilt, David," Chloe retorted coldly. "You still see that woman as your saintly mother, instead of seeing her for what she really is. She's an obstacle to our future." An obstacle. The word rang in my head like a funeral bell. For the woman my son had chosen as his life partner, I was not a person. I was not family. I was simply something to be removed from their path. "Besides," Chloe continued, closing the laptop with a definitive snap, "once we have the house, we can look for a decent retirement home for her, something affordable, but comfortable. With the $1.2 million from the sale, we can invest in our own business, and we'd still have plenty left over to take care of her properly." Retirement home. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. They wanted to sell my house, my life's work, and then use my own money to lock me in an institution. The cruelty of their plan was so refined, so chillingly pragmatic, it almost seemed professional. David sat down next to her on the couch, and for the first time in days, he seemed to relax. The brief flicker of conscience was gone. "You really think it'll work?" "Slade's done this before," Chloe replied, stroking his hair as if he were a pet. "He says he has a contact at the city registry who can fast-track the property transfer. The brownstone will be in our names in 2 weeks. Tops. 2 weeks." They had everything timed with military precision. "And the money?" David asked. "Slade charges $50,000 for the whole process. It's expensive, but think about it. It's an investment. We're talking about a massive profit." $50,000. That was the price they had put on my trust, my home, and my dignity as a mother. For the rest of that day, I acted with a superhuman normalcy that terrified me. I cooked David's favorite meal, a pot roast that Arthur used to love. I asked about their day. I even offered them extra money to go to the movies, to get out and relax. Every smile I forced onto my lips felt like it was cracking my face. Every kind word I spoke felt like swallowing ash. But I needed time. I needed to process what I had discovered, and I needed to plan my next move. That night, long after they had gone to bed, I sat in the dark kitchen with a cup of chamomile tea and my phone. I reviewed all the recordings, uploading them to a secure, new cloud account. I took meticulous notes, writing down every detail: dates, names, specific amounts. I had complete conversations where they confessed their entire criminal plan. I had enough evidence to destroy their lives, to send my own son to prison. But something stopped me from calling the police immediately. Maybe it was the last, dying ember of hope that David would come to his senses. Maybe it was a mother's pathological need to protect her child, even when that child had become a monster. Or maybe, in the deepest, coldest part of my heart, I needed a direct confrontation before I took an action that could never be reversed. Wednesday dawned with a light rain that beat against the windows, a mournful tapping that mirrored the state of my soul. David and Chloe had breakfast in silence, but it was not a comfortable silence. It was charged, and they exchanged complicit glances that I pretended not to notice. There was a different tension in the air, the sharp, metallic smell of a trap about to be sprung. "Mom," David said, after finishing his coffee, his voice artificially gentle, "we need to talk to you about something important." Here it was, the moment they had been preparing for. The performance was beginning. "Of course, my love," I replied, sitting across from them at the dining table, the same table where we had shared thousands of family meals. "What is it about?" Chloe cleared her throat and placed a thick, official-looking folder on the table. "Eleanor, we've been thinking about your future, about your financial security." "My financial security?" I asked, genuinely confused by this new, benevolent angle. "Yes," David intervened, taking my hand. His skin was cold and clammy, but he applied that fake, tender pressure that now made me sick. "We've been looking into wills, medical directives, that kind of important thing every person your age should have in order." Chloe opened the folder and took out several documents, dense with text and signature lines. A legal consultant friend of David's helped us prepare some papers to update all your legal documentation. They're just standard forms, nothing complicated. Slade, it had to be him. These were the fraudulent documents. "What kind of documents?" I asked, feigning the naivety they expected from me, the naivety they had worked so hard to cultivate. "Basically, it's to ensure that if anything happens to you," David explained, "both your will and the ownership of the house are legally in order. It also includes an authorization for us to handle your medical and financial affairs if you ever can't do it yourself. Authorization to handle my affairs." They wanted me to sign over a complete power of attorney. They wanted me to hand them the keys to my own life. "It's for your own good, Eleanor," Chloe added, her voice syrupy and false. "Imagine if you had an accident or a serious illness. Without these papers, David couldn't help you with anything legal." They handed me the documents. I could see they were full of complicated legal terms, entire paragraphs in tiny print designed to be impenetrable. But I managed to make out a few key words: transfer, assignment of rights, irrevocable power. "I don't really understand all of this," I said, holding the papers and affecting a look of total confusion. "It's so much. Could you explain it to me more slowly?" I saw a flash of pure impatience cross Chloe's face, but David maintained his mask of compassion. "Mom, they're just boring technical things," he said dismissively. "The important thing is that you sign here, here, and here." He pointed to several lines marked with small, helpful X's. "The consultant says it's urgent. There are changes in tax laws that could affect you if you don't update these documents before the 1st of next month." Lies. It was all a convoluted, tangled lie to pressure me into signing my life away without reading. "What if I want to read everything first?" I asked, my voice small. "I'm a slow reader, you know, but I like to understand what I'm signing." Chloe's mask of patience began to crack. "Eleanor, it's over 20 pages of legal jargon. It would take you days to fully understand it, and as David said, it's urgent." "Besides," David added, "we trust that the consultant did everything correctly. He's a very respected professional." Respected? Slade, the man who, by their own words, had done this kind of fraud before. "Well," I finally said, putting the papers back on the table, "let me think about it until tomorrow. It's a very important decision, and I want to be sure." The silence that followed was so thick you could cut it with a knife. David and Chloe exchanged a look of pure, unadulterated alarm, which they tried to hide. "Mom," David said, his voice taking on a firmer, less patient tone, "we really need you to sign today. The consultant gave us an appointment for early tomorrow, and if we don't bring the signed documents, we'll lose the opportunity." "What opportunity?" I asked. Chloe leaned forward, her patience finally, completely exhausted. "The opportunity to protect you legally, Eleanor. Don't you trust us? Don't you trust your own son?" There it was, the emotional manipulation they had been saving as their final card. They were turning my caution, my basic self-preservation, into a matter of family trust. "Of course, I trust you," I lied, picking up the pen David had placed next to the documents. "I just wanted to be sure." I watched them immediately relax. Their shoulders dropped. Their faces lit up with a mix of relief and triumphant anticipation. They thought they had won. They thought the old woman had folded. I held the pen over the first signature line. I paused. "You know what? I'm going to call my lawyer, Mr. Breyer, first, just to have him look it over. He handled Arthur's estate. He'll understand this." "Mom!" David exploded, completely losing his composure for the first time. The shout was so loud it echoed through the dining room. "You do not need to call anyone. Just sign the damn papers." The shout hung in the air like a gunshot. In that one violent moment, I knew I had gone too far. I could not keep pretending. The war was no longer secret. It was open, declared, and I was standing on the battlefield alone. David's shout still rang in my ears when I saw his true face, unfiltered, for the first time in years. The mask of the loving, concerned son had disintegrated. There were no fake smiles, no sweet words. There was only a desperate, furious man whose victim was resisting being devoured. "David," I whispered, my hand trembling as I dropped the pen on the table, "why are you yelling at me?" He immediately realized his mistake. I watched him visibly struggle to recompose his facade, to regain control of the situation. But it was too late. The beast had shown its fangs. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of high drama. "I've just been so stressed lately. The financial situation, the job hunt, it's all overwhelming." Chloe put a hand on his arm, a gesture that seemed reassuring, but I knew was a silent warning. "Control your temper." "What David means," she intervened, her voice miraculously calm again, "is that these legal procedures are very stressful for everyone. That's why it's better to get it over with and not prolong it unnecessarily." Unnecessarily. As if my caution were a senile whim and not the basic survival instinct of a woman who had just discovered her own family was plotting her ruin. "I understand you're stressed," I said, my own voice hardening as I got up from the table. "But I am not signing anything until I am completely sure what it means. I am old, David, but I am not an idiot." The words came out of my mouth with more force than I had used in months. I saw both of them stand still, surprised by my sudden, uncharacteristic firmness. "Nobody said you were an idiot, Mom," David murmured, but his tone had a dangerous, sullen edge. "Then don't treat me like one," I replied. "These documents are staying here until I decide what to do with them." I took the papers from the table and put them in a kitchen drawer. It was a symbolic gesture, but I needed to show them, and myself, that I still had control over my own life. They stayed at the dining table, whispering so low I could not hear them. I retreated to my room, locking the door, under the pretense of taking a nap. In reality, I wanted to review the camera recordings of the conversation we just had. From the privacy of my locked room, I opened the app. There they were, still sitting in my dining room, their heads bent together, talking in hushed, agitated tones. "This is not going according to plan," Chloe said, clearly upset. "She was supposed to sign without asking questions. You said she was confused." "She has been," David replied defensively. "But she's been more suspicious lately. It's like she suspects something." "Did you tell anyone about our plan?" "Of course not. I'm not stupid." Chloe was pensive for a moment, drumming her manicured fingers on my dining table. "We need to change our strategy. If she won't sign the easy way, we'll have to pressure her another way." "What do you propose?" "Your mother depends on us for a lot of things, doesn't she?" Chloe asked. "Her supplemental medical insurance, the rides to her specialists, the heavy grocery runs, her credit card for extra expenses." "Yeah, but her pension covers the basics," David said. "Exactly. The basics." Chloe smiled, and it was pure malice. What would happen if those extras suddenly disappeared? If she had to live solely on her pension, like a commoner? David frowned, not fully understanding. "Think about it," she continued, laying out the new plan. "Without our financial support, she'd have to cancel her private medical insurance. She'd be reliant on the public system, with its long waits. Without our car, she'd have to take public transport or expensive taxis to her doctor. Without our help with the shopping, she'd have to carry heavy bags all by herself." The perversity of their new plan began to take shape before my eyes. They wanted to create an artificial crisis in my life. They were going to systematically dismantle the comforts and supports I had, to force me into a position of complete and total dependency. "It's brilliant," David admitted, and the undisguised pride in his voice made me feel sick. "If we pressure her financially, if we make her life difficult, she'll have no choice but to sign the documents to ensure our continued support." "Exactly. And if she resists, we just tell her we can't afford to help her anymore. We don't have stable jobs. We need legal certainty about our shared future, about this house, to justify that kind of emotional and financial investment." Investment. They talked about taking care of their mother as if it were a business transaction with an expected return on capital. "How long do you think she'll hold out?" David asked. A 71-year-old woman, accustomed to this level of comfort, suddenly facing severe restrictions? Chloe shrugged. 2 weeks. Tops. 2 weeks. The same deadline Slade had given them to complete the legal fraud. They got up from the table and went to their room. I heard them discussing the specific details. They would cancel my supplemental insurance that very day. They would deny me use of the car for my cardiologist appointment on Friday. They would stop doing the grocery shopping. It was a comprehensive plan of economic abuse, designed to break my psychological resistance. And the most terrifying part was how well thought out it was. They knew exactly what my vulnerable points were, and they were going to attack them methodically. That night, after they fell asleep, I sat in the kitchen again, the house dark and silent around me. I copied all the new recordings. I had clear evidence of attempted fraud, and now, a conspiracy to commit elder abuse. But I still wasn't ready to call the police. There was something inside me, perhaps that foolish maternal part that still hoped for a miracle, that needed to give David one last chance to come to his senses. I wanted to confront him directly. I wanted to show him that I knew everything, every sordid detail, and see if there was anything at all, left of the son I had raised. I decided that the next day, I would put my own plan into action. If they wanted to play with psychological pressure, I would show them how someone with 71 years of life experience does it. But first, I needed to make sure my evidence was safe. I copied everything to a small USB drive, which I then hid inside an old, hollowed-out copy of Moby Dick, a place they would never think to look. The war was escalating, and I intended to win. The silence in the kitchen spread like an oil slick. David and Chloe looked at me, their faces a mask of shock and rapid calculation. They were re-evaluating their opponent. I was no longer the naive, confused mother they had been manipulating. I was a woman who had discovered their game and was ready to confront them. "Mom," David finally said, his voice filled with that fake, saccharine concern that was now repulsive to me. "I think you're misinterpreting our intentions." "Oh, really?" I replied, crossing my arms. My body felt strangely calm, filled with a cold, clear energy. "Then explain to me why your sudden financial crisis perfectly coincides with your desperate need for me to sign documents you refuse to let me read." Chloe intervened, assuming her role as the patient, reasonable one. That condescending smile she had perfected was back. "Eleanor, I understand you might feel confused by all this complex legal information. It's a lot to take in." "I am not confused." I cut her off, my voice sharp. "I am betrayed." The word landed on the table like a bomb. I saw David physically flinch, as if the reality of the word had finally penetrated his consciousness. "Betrayed," I repeated, savoring each syllable. "By the son I raised, the son I fed with my own labor, the son I educated by sacrificing my own comfort. The son who now plots to steal my house and put me in a cheap retirement home." "I don't want to steal anything from you," David exploded, hitting the table with his fist. "Everything I do is thinking about our shared future." "Our future?" I laughed, a bitter, dry sound. "David, your plan includes selling my home from under me. Your plan includes something affordable but comfortable for my last years. In what part of that plan am I included as family, and not as an obstacle to be discarded?" Chloe and David exchanged a look of pure alarm. I had just shown them I knew more than they had calculated. I had quoted their own words back to them. "I don't know where you get these ideas," Chloe murmured, but her voice had lost all its previous confidence. "Ideas?" I took my phone out of my pocket and put it on the table between us. "Do you want me to remind you? Do you want to hear your own voices planning it? You forgot. You forgot that the security camera I sent to be repaired is working perfectly. You forgot to tell me you were going to confess all your criminal plans in my own study." The color drained from their faces. David looked at the phone as if it were a venomous snake. You were recording us?" he whispered. "No," I replied with deadly calm. "You were recording yourselves." Chloe got up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. How long have you been spying on us?" "Since Tuesday," I admitted without flinching. 3 full days of recordings. 3 days of you confessing your conspiracy to forge my signature, to steal my home, to get rid of me. I have complete conversations about Mr. Slade, the $50,000 fee for the fraud, and your plans to sell this property." David stood up too, but he looked like a cornered animal, not a threat. "Mom, please, let me explain." "Explain what?" My voice rose for the first time. "Explain that your wife sees me as an obstacle? That you've been lying for 6 weeks about looking for a job while you plan to rob me? That you consider my entire life's work to be worth only the money you can get for it?" "It's not like that," he yelled, but his eyes were filled with the tears of a child caught in a lie. Desperation, not sincerity. "Then tell me, David." I walked up to him until we were face to face, until he was forced to look at me. "When Chloe said it was time to stop seeing me as your saintly mother and start seeing me as an obstacle, what was your response?" Silence. He knew. He knew I had the recording. He could not lie. "Your response," I continued relentlessly, was, "You're right. It's time to think about us." Those were your exact words, David. After 38 years of me thinking only of you, you decided it was time to sacrifice me. David collapsed back into his chair, covering his face with his hands. For a moment, I thought repentance had finally arrived. But Chloe had not given up. "Fine," she said, regaining a sliver of her composure. "Let's say you have those recordings. What do you plan to do with them?" The question took me by surprise. There was no panic in her voice, There was defiance. "Excuse me?" I asked. "I'm asking what you plan to do," she repeated, crossing her arms. "Because as far as I know, David is still your son. Are you really going to destroy your own family for a house?" The audacity of her response left me speechless. Even now, completely exposed, she was trying to manipulate me, to make me the villain. "Destroy my family?" I repeated slowly. "Chloe, you two have already destroyed this family. I am just defending what is left of my life." "Defending yourself?" she scoffed. "A 71-year-old woman, alone, with no family but us. What are you going to do, Eleanor? Call the police? Report your only son?" There was something in her tone, a new confidence, that put me on high alert. "If necessary," I replied. Chloe smiled. It was pure malice. "And who's going to believe you? An old woman who, by her own admission, has been spying on her family. An old woman who clearly has problems with trust and paranoia." "I have proof," I said, but my voice wavered. "You have illegally obtained recordings," she interrupted. "Recordings made without our consent on a property where we have a legal right of residence. Any mediocre lawyer would get them ruled inadmissible in 5 minutes." My heart began to beat faster. Was that true? "Besides," Chloe continued, now walking around the table like a predator circling its prey, "who is going to take a woman seriously who is clearly developing paranoid behaviors? Spying, inventing conspiracies, socially isolating herself." "I'm not socially isolating myself," I protested. She stopped in front of me. "When was the last time you talked to a friend, Eleanor? When was the last time you left this house for something that wasn't strictly necessary? David has told me how you've been behaving. The mood swings, the distrust, the forgetfulness." David lifted his head, and for the first time since the confrontation began, he spoke with something resembling certainty. "It's true, Mom. I've been worried about you. That's why we wanted you to sign those documents, to ensure that if your mental health continues to deteriorate, we have the legal tools to help you." My blood ran cold. Deteriorating mental health. They were building an alternative narrative. A narrative where I was the villain, the crazy old woman who had misinterpreted their loving gestures as criminal conspiracies. "You two know perfectly well there is nothing wrong with my mental health," I said. "Oh, really?" Chloe sat down again, now in full control. "A woman who installs secret cameras, who invents elaborate theories about theft, who refuses to sign basic legal documents out of paranoia." "They are not theories," I yelled. "I heard you planning everything." "You heard us having normal conversations about your future," David corrected, his voice now filled with a terrible, false pity. "Conversations that your mind interpreted as threats." It was brilliant. It was diabolically brilliant. They were turning the situation completely around, converting my discovery of their betrayal into evidence of my own mental instability. "Slade," I said desperately. "You talked about Slade, and the $50,000. Mr. Slade is a real legal consultant who is helping us with real paperwork," Chloe replied without blinking. "The $50,000 is his fee for a complex job of updating documentation, all completely legal. And the retirement home, selling the house." David sighed, as if he were talking to a difficult child. "Mom, we talked about future options, in case you ever needed specialized care. It's something all responsible families consider." I felt as if the floor were opening up beneath my feet. Every piece of evidence I thought I had, every recording, they were reinterpreting, twisting it into proof of my own mental decline. But you said I was an obstacle," I murmured. "We said that your resistance to planning your future was an obstacle," Chloe corrected. "An obstacle to us helping you properly." "Mom," David came closer and put his hands on my shoulders. His touch felt like spiders. "We're worried about you. This behavior isn't normal. The paranoia, the accusations, spying. Maybe you need to talk to someone, a professional, a psychiatrist. They wanted to make me seem crazy to invalidate any resistance. But then I remembered something they could not reinterpret. If everything is so innocent," I said, regaining a sliver of my strength, "you won't mind showing those documents, The ones you want me to sign, to my own lawyer, Mr. Breyer, not Slade, someone I choose. The silence that followed gave me all the answer I needed. Chloe and David looked at each other, and in that one, unguarded look, I saw the pure, cold panic they had been hiding. "Of course," Chloe finally said, but her voice had lost all its confidence. "Whenever you want." But she was lying, and they knew that I knew she was lying. The war had just entered a new, more terrifying phase. It was no longer about my house, it was about my sanity. And that was a war I was not willing to lose. The next few days were the strangest, most terrifying of my life. David and Chloe had completely changed their strategy. They were no longer trying to trick me. They were treating me as if I were mentally ill, a danger to myself, and in need of their specialized care. It started that same afternoon. I heard David make a phone call that chilled my blood. "Dr. Reed?" he said from their room, but loud enough for me to hear from the hallway. "It's David Vance, Eleanor's son." Dr. Evelyn Reed had been my family doctor for 20 years, a woman I trusted who knew my medical history better than anyone. "Yes, doctor, I'm very worried about my mother's mental state," David continued, his voice a perfect blend of concern and exhaustion. "She's developed some very severe paranoid behaviors. She thinks we're conspiring against her. She's convinced we want to steal her house. She even installed secret cameras to spy on us." The horror of what he was doing paralyzed me. He was proactively building a false medical record. He was using my own discovery of their betrayal as the primary evidence of my dementia. "When did it start?" He paused, as if carefully considering. "Gradually, over the last few months, but this week it's intensified. Yesterday, she directly accused us of wanting to put her in a retirement home." Another pause. "Yes, doctor, I understand it's sensitive, but frankly, we're scared. We don't know how far her paranoia can go." Scared. They had inverted the entire narrative. They were the victims of my paranoia. I ran to my room and locked the door, my hands trembling. I opened the camera app on my phone. I needed to record this conversation. But when I tried to access the audio from their room, there was nothing but static. A coincidence? I highly doubted it. They were getting smarter. For the rest of the afternoon, they treated me with an exaggerated kindness that was more terrifying than their open hostility. They spoke in soft, placating voices. "Mom, do you feel all right?" David would ask every half hour. "No headache? You're not feeling confused?" "You look a little pale, Eleanor," Chloe would add. "Are you sleeping well? No strange nightmares?" Every question was a trap. If I said I felt confused, I confirmed their narrative. If I said I was fine, they could interpret my denial as proof I was unaware of my own condition. That night, from my room, I heard them planning the next phase. "Tomorrow, I'm calling Dr. Reed to schedule an urgent appointment." Chloe said, "We need a professional to officially document her deterioration." "What if she refuses to go?" David asked. "She can't. We'll tell her it's a routine checkup for her blood pressure. Once she's in the office, we'll talk to the doctor privately and explain the real situation. The doctor has seen cases like this before. She'll believe us." The next day, Friday, David announced at breakfast that he had scheduled a doctor's appointment for me. "It's just a routine checkup, Mom," he said, "to check your blood pressure." "I don't need a checkup," I replied. "I feel fine." "Of course you feel fine," Chloe intervened, "but at your age, it's important. Besides, you've been a little different lately, nervous, distrustful." "I am not nervous or distrustful," I said firmly. "I am alert, because I discovered my own family was betraying me." David sighed dramatically. "Mom, please, nobody is betraying you. Those are exactly the ideas we need the doctor to check out." Ideas. My discovery, my evidence, reduced to ideas. "I'm not going," I declared. "Yes, you are," David replied, his voice hard. "It's for your own good." "And if I refuse?" The silence was telling. "Well," David finally said, "we'd have to consider other options, for your safety and ours." Other options, an involuntary psychiatric hold. They were threatening to have me committed. That afternoon, while they were out, I called Dr. Reed directly. "Evelyn, it's Eleanor Jones," I said, my voice shaking. "Eleanor, what a coincidence. Your son was just here yesterday. He's very worried about your mental state." My heart sank. "Evelyn," I said, "I need to speak with you. In private. My son and his wife are trying to steal my house. When I discovered them, they changed tactics. They are trying to have me declared mentally incompetent to discredit my accusations." There was a long pause. "Eleanor," Dr. Reed said, her voice serious, "those are very grave accusations. Do you have any proof?" "They destroyed it. They convinced me I imagined it all, that the cameras, the recordings, it was all in my head." "And how do you know you didn't imagine it?" "Because an hour ago I heard David on the phone with Slade, the lawyer. He mentioned a $5,000 down payment and said that Chloe could forge my signature if necessary." "Marisol," Dr. Reed said, "I have known your medical history for 15 years. You have shown zero signs of cognitive decline. Your last neurological exam was perfect. But your son's story was very convincing. I need you to come in. Now." For the next 2 hours, Dr. Reed put me through a complete battery of cognitive tests. Memory, executive function, reasoning. I passed them all with perfect scores. "Eleanor," she finally said, "you have the sharpest mind of any 71-year-old I know. There is absolutely no sign of decline." "I am documenting this officially." She held up a printed report. "This states you are in full command of your mental faculties and are perfectly capable of making all legal and financial decisions." For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. I was not crazy. "What do we do?" I asked. "First," she said, "I'm giving you the contact of a private detective. Second, a lawyer specializing in elder protection. David and Chloe cannot know about this. We are going to set a trap." I went home. David and Chloe were waiting. "How did it go, Mom? What did the doctor say?" I looked them both in the eye. She said I'm perfectly fine, just under a lot of stress. I watched their faces fall. She said it might be a good idea to finally organize those papers you wanted me to sign, to reduce my anxiety. Their faces lit up with barely contained triumph. "That's great news, Mom," David said. "Yes," I lied. "We can review them together tomorrow. I want to be sure I understand them." That afternoon, while they thought I was napping, I was on the phone for hours. First with the detective, Mr. Russo, then with the lawyer, Miss Albright. "Mrs. Vance," Russo told me, "we need direct, admissible evidence. Would you be willing to wear a hidden microphone to record their confession?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "Good. We'll install the equipment first thing in the morning." That night, while David and Chloe celebrated what they believed was their imminent victory, I carefully planned the trap. The hunter, I thought, had officially become the hunted. Tuesday morning arrived with a crystal-clear light. At 7 a.m., while David and Chloe slept, Mr. Russo, the detective, arrived. In less than an hour, he had installed microscopic cameras in the dining room and fitted me with a small, powerful microphone hidden in the brooch on my blouse. "Remember, Mrs. Vance," he said, "get them to confess the plan. The forgery, the lawyer, the house. Be the confused old woman they think you are, until you're not." At 2 p.m., we sat down at the dining table. The stage was set. "All right, Mom," David began. "We'll go over each document." "Perfect," I replied, my hand resting on the brooch. He explained the power of attorney. "This just lets us handle your affairs if you can't." "If I can't?" I asked. "Or if you two decide I can't? Like last week, when you thought I was paranoid?" David tensed. "Mom, that was different. You were showing real symptoms." "Symptoms? Or was it just convenient? Convenient that just when I discover you want me to sign these papers, I suddenly develop memory problems that justify you taking control?" "Mom, no one is trying to control your life," David said, his patience cracking. "No? Then explain why this document," I pointed to a clause, "gives you the power to sell my house without my consent, dispose of real estate for the welfare of the grantor." That's for emergencies, Chloe snapped. If you needed care. Care? I said. Like that affordable but comfortable place you mentioned, the one for my last years? The silence was absolute. David had gone pale. I don't know what you're talking about, Chloe muttered. Of course you do. Just as you know, Mr. Slade isn't a legitimate consultant. He's a specialist in forging documents. Where did you hear that name? David stood up abruptly. On your phone call yesterday, when you told him the old lady was more alert and that Chloe could forge my signature if necessary. The mask finally fell. You've been spying on us, he accused, his voice a furious roar. I've been protecting myself, I corrected, from my own son, who decided that robbing me was easier than working honestly. Marisol, Chloe sneered. It doesn't matter what you think you heard. You have no proof. No proof? I got up from the table. You're sure? Completely, she said with arrogance. Because we made sure you had no proof. We erased all your imaginary recordings. We know you're crazy. So you admit it? I asked, my voice calm. You admit it was all a setup? A plan to steal my house? You bet we did, Chloe exploded, her rage finally uncorked. You stupid old woman. You've been sitting on this $1.2 million gold mine while we live like beggars on your charity. That $1,500 a month, it's insulting. She's right, Mom, David added, his face twisted with a coldness I had never seen. This house should be mine. You've just been an obstacle. You've served your purpose. An obstacle, I repeated, my fingers touching the brooch. Thank you. That's all I needed. As if on cue, the front door opened. Mr. Russo, Miss Albright, and 2 uniformed Boston police officers walked in. Good afternoon, Russo said. David Vance and Chloe Vance, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted document forgery, and elder financial abuse. The shock on their faces was absolute. Chloe began to back away. David stood frozen. This is impossible, he murmured, staring at me. You have no proof. I calmly unpinned the brooch from my blouse and placed it on the table. Actually, David, I have high-quality recordings of this entire conversation. Recordings where you explicitly confess to your plan to forge my signature, institutionalize me against my will, and have me declared mentally incompetent. Miss Albright stepped forward. In addition to the audio, we have high-definition video of this conversation and a complete medical report from Dr. Reed stating Mrs. Vance is of perfectly sound mind. You have confessed to multiple felonies. This is an illegal trap, Chloe shrieked. You recorded us without consent. False, the detective replied. Mrs. Vance has the right to record conversations on her own property when there is reasonable suspicion of criminal activity, and you confessed voluntarily. David finally reacted, but not with remorse, with blind fury. This is all your fault, you old. If you had just given us what was ours, none of this would be necessary. One of the officers began to read David his rights as he put on the handcuffs. Marcus, I said, for 38 years, I gave you everything. I gave up my own life to build yours. All I asked for in return was respect, honesty. Instead, you chose to see me as an obstacle to be removed. You chose greed over love. We took care of you, Angelica yelled as the second officer cuffed her. You took care of me like vultures care for a dying animal, I retorted, waiting for the right moment to devour the remains. The only difference is you didn't wait for me to die. You decided to speed up the process. As they were led toward the door, David looked back, his eyes finally filled with desperate, pleading tears. Mom, please, I'm your son. Are you really going to destroy your own family for a house? The question that had tormented me for days finally had a clear, simple answer. David, I said, you destroyed this family the moment you decided my life was worth less than my property. I am simply protecting what's left of my dignity and my right to live in peace. After they were gone, I was alone in my house for the first time in months. The silence was profound, but it was not frightening. It was the silence of recovered peace, of a fever broken. 3 months later, David and Chloe accepted a plea deal. They renounced all rights to my property and inheritance, agreed to a permanent restraining order, and served 18 months in prison. I eventually sold the brownstone. There were too many ghosts in those beautiful rooms. I live peacefully now, in a small condo by the sea. I have learned that true family is not defined by blood, but by mutual respect. And I learned that the greatest betrayal can sometimes reveal the greatest strength. I had always thought my job was to be a mother, to sacrifice. I realized, too late, that maternal love practiced at the cost of self-preservation is not virtue, it is self-destruction. Sometimes, to save yourself, you must be willing to lose the very people you thought you could not live without.